Good evening and welcome. Tonight, the Middle East is once again facing a moment of extraordinary tension, uncertainty, and strategic danger. What began as another night of rising regional hostility may now be developing into something far more serious. A confrontation that analysts warn could reshape security calculations across the region and beyond. Iran has launched a major wave of missiles and drones targeting Israel, triggering emergency sirens, activating air defense systems, and placing millions of civilians on alert across several areas. Residents were instructed to move into shelters as Israeli security officials worked rapidly to intercept incoming projectiles. According to multiple reports, explosions were heard in different locations as interception systems engaged targets in the sky. But behind the dramatic images and breaking headlines, a much larger strategic picture may now be emerging. This latest escalation does not appear to be an isolated event. Instead, many observers believe it represents another phase in a longer and increasingly dangerous shadow conflict that has been unfolding across the Middle East for years. A conflict involving covert operations, cyber warfare, intelligence activities, regional proxy networks, strategic assassinations, military signaling, and competing visions for the future balance of power in the region. And tonight, that conflict may be entering a more unpredictable stage. Iranian officials have indicated that the attacks are linked to what Tran describes as ongoing Israeli military actions and targeted operations against Iranian interests. Israeli officials, meanwhile, have maintained that they are acting to protect national security and prevent what they describe as growing threats from Iranian-backed military infrastructure across the region. The immediate concern tonight is not only the scale of the attack itself, but what it may signal about the intentions of both sides moving forward. Military analysts say the combination of drones and missile launches is strategically significant. Such attacks are often designed not only to test defensive systems, but also to create psychological pressure, stretch interception capabilities, and send political messages to both domestic and international audiences. However, the larger question is whether this operation was intended as a limited warning or whether it could mark the beginning of a broader cycle of escalation. That is exactly why governments around the world are watching developments with increasing concern. In Israel, emergency services were placed on high alert almost immediately. Security officials reportedly moved quickly to assess possible impact zones, while military command centers monitored the situation in real time. Civil defense instructions were issued across multiple regions, reflecting fears that additional attack waves could follow. Although many incoming threats were reportedly intercepted, military observers caution that even successful defensive operations can create new strategic calculations. Air defense systems are highly advanced, but they are also resource intensive. Sustained exchanges over an extended period can place enormous pressure on military readiness, political leadership, and public morale. This is where the situation becomes even more complicated. For years, the confrontation between Iran and Israel has often remained below the threshold of direct, full-scale war. Tensions have traditionally unfolded through indirect channels, including regional militias, cyber operations, maritime incidents, intelligence activities, and targeted strikes. But direct exchanges between states carry very different risks. When missiles cross borders openly and publicly, the pressure on governments changes dramatically. Domestic audiences demand responses. Political leaders face strategic expectations. Military establishments prepare for worst-case scenarios. and international allies begin reassessing their own security positions. That may be one of the most important developments unfolding tonight behind closed doors. According to analysts, one of the key questions now involves proportionality. Will Israel view these attacks as something requiring a limited response? Or could military planners argue for a broader strategic reaction aimed at restoring deterrence? Deterrence remains one of the central concepts shaping the entire crisis in the Middle East. Perception often matters almost as much as military capability itself. Governments throughout the region closely monitor whether threats are answered, whether red lines are enforced, and whether strategic credibility is maintained. That is why every statement, every military movement, and every diplomatic signal tonight carries significance far beyond the immediate battlefield. Yet, some analysts believe the real story may be unfolding elsewhere, not only in the skies over Israel or Iran, but inside regional command centers and diplomatic channels across the Gulf, Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and European capitals. Because, while the missiles and drones dominate global headlines, international powers are already calculating what comes next. The United States now faces a particularly sensitive position. Washington has long maintained strong support for Israeli security while simultaneously attempting to prevent a wider regional war. American officials have repeatedly emphasized the importance of deterrence, regional stability, and protection of international shipping routes and strategic energy infrastructure. However, every new escalation increases the possibility of unintended consequences. Military experts warn that even if neither side seeks full-scale war, crises of this nature can evolve rapidly through miscalculation, communication failures, or unexpected battlefield developments. A single major strike causing significant casualties could dramatically alter political pressure on all sides. An interception failure could trigger demands for retaliation. An attack involving regional proxy forces could widen the conflict unexpectedly. And this is precisely intelligence agencies across the world are monitoring events hour by hour. Behind the public statements, a different calculation may also be taking shape. Several observers believe both Iran and Israel are attempting to communicate strength while avoiding uncontrollable escalation at the same time. That balancing act is extraordinarily difficult. Iran may seek to demonstrate that it retains the capability to respond forcefully against perceived threats. Israeli leaders, meanwhile, may feel compelled to show that deterrence remains intact and that attacks against Israeli territory will carry consequences. But maintaining escalation control during moments of high tension is never guaranteed. History has repeatedly shown that conflicts do not always expand because leaders initially intend them to. Sometimes crises grow because events move faster than diplomacy. That possibility is now attracting serious attention among international security analysts. Another critical factor involves regional alliances across the Gulf. Governments are watching carefully. Countries throughout the region understand that a prolonged confrontation between Iran and Israel could threaten economic stability, energy exports, shipping lanes, tourism, investment confidence, and internal security conditions. Several Gulf states have spent years attempting to reduce regional tensions through diplomacy and economic modernization efforts. A broader conflict could place those ambitions under enormous pressure. Oil markets are also reacting with growing concern even before tonight's developments. Global energy markets were already facing uncertainty tied to geopolitical instability, supply chain vulnerabilities, and broader economic pressures. Any escalation involving major regional powers raises immediate fears regarding oil transportation routes, particularly around strategically critical maritime corridors. Traders, investors, and governments are now closely assessing whether the current crisis could affect shipping security or energy infrastructure. And the implications would not stop there. A wider regional conflict could influence inflation, transportation costs, financial markets, defense spending, and global economic confidence at a time when many economies are already navigating fragile conditions. That is one reason why international diplomatic activity is expected to intensify in the coming hours. According to reports, multiple governments are already engaging in urgent discussions aimed at preventing further escalation. Diplomatic channels involving regional states, European powers, and major global actors are believed to be active tonight. However, diplomacy during active military crises is extraordinarily difficult. Publicly, leaders often adopt firm rhetoric to avoid appearing weak. Privately, many may be searching for exit strategies, and that creates a dangerous contradiction. Because while public messaging can escalate tensions, quiet negotiations may simultaneously attempt to contain them. This dual track reality has become a defining feature of modern geopolitical crisis. Another major question tonight concerns the role of regional proxy groups and aligned militias. For years, analysts have warned that the Middle East security environment has become deeply interconnected. A confrontation involving one actor can quickly generate reactions across multiple theaters, including Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, the Red Sea, and beyond. That interconnected network significantly increases the complexity of any crisis involving Iran and Israel. Military planners are not only monitoring direct state-to-state exchanges, they are also watching for signs of mobilization among regional armed groups that could become involved either intentionally or indirectly. And this is where the situation becomes even more unpredictable, because once multiple fronts begin activating simultaneously, controlling escalation becomes far more difficult. Israel's northern borders, maritime security concerns, regional missile defense coordination, cyber infrastructure vulnerabilities, and airspace monitoring systems are all now receiving heightened attention. Meanwhile, Iranian strategic calculations may also involve broader considerations. Some observers suggest Tehran could be attempting to demonstrate resilience under pressure while reinforcing deterrence against future operations targeting Iranian interests. Others believe the message may also be directed toward domestic audiences, regional allies, and international adversaries simultaneously. But questions remain. Was this operation carefully calibrated to avoid crossing certain thresholds, or could further actions already be under consideration? This has not been independently confirmed, and much remains uncertain tonight. What makes the current moment particularly significant is the broader geopolitical environment surrounding it. Global power competition is already intensifying between major international actors. Relations involving the United States, Russia, and China remain highly sensitive across multiple regions. Conflicts in Europe, instability in global trade routes, technological rivalry, and economic fragmentation have all contributed to a more fragile international system. Against that backdrop, any major Middle East escalation carries amplified global consequences. Russia and China are also being watched closely. Both countries maintain important strategic relationships across the region. Although their approaches differ significantly, Moscow has historically balanced ties involving Iran, Syria, and Israel in highly complex ways. Beijing, meanwhile, has expanded diplomatic and economic engagement throughout the Gulf while emphasizing regional stability and energy security. The reactions from these powers may provide important clues regarding the future direction of international diplomacy surrounding the crisis. Yet some analysts believe the deeper concern may involve something even larger: the gradual erosion of traditional crisis management mechanisms. In previous decades, major powers often maintained more direct communication channels during periods of high geopolitical tension. Today's international environment is more fragmented, more polarized, and in some ways more unpredictable. That reality increases the risk of misunderstanding. And misunderstanding during military crises can become extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, intelligence assessments are likely focusing on another critical issue tonight: intent. Understanding military capability is one challenge. Understanding political intent is another. Analysts are now asking whether current actions are designed primarily for signaling, retaliation, deterrence, domestic politics, or preparation for a longer confrontation. Each possibility carries very different implications. If the goal is symbolic pressure, escalation may remain limited. If the objective involves restoring deterrence credibility, controlled responses could follow. But if either side concludes that strategic balance has fundamentally shifted, the risks could increase substantially. This is why military observers are paying close attention not only to attacks themselves, but to force positioning, reserve mobilizations, naval deployments, intelligence coordination, and emergency diplomatic communications. Sometimes the most important developments are not the ones visible on television screens. Sometimes they happen quietly behind closed doors. And tonight, those unseen conversations may be shaping the next phase of the crisis. There is also growing concern regarding civilian psychology across the region. Periods of sustained uncertainty can generate fear, anxiety, economic disruption, and political pressure. Civilians throughout the Middle East have experienced years of instability, conflict, and security crisis. Many now fear the possibility of another prolonged regional confrontation. That emotional dimension matters politically. Governments must manage not only military realities, but also public expectations, economic stability, and social cohesion. At the same time, international airlines, shipping companies, investors, and multinational corporations are closely reviewing risk assessments connected to regional operations. Even the perception of instability can produce immediate global effects. And yet, despite the intensity of the current moment, several analysts caution against assuming that full-scale war is inevitable. History also shows that rival states sometimes engage in carefully calibrated confrontations designed to establish deterrence boundaries without triggering uncontrollable escalation. Well, that possibility is still being discussed tonight, yet another interpretation is gaining increasing attention among analysts. What if neither side is acting recklessly, but both are instead operating under cautious intent that is being dangerously misread by the other? This is often how major international crises begin to escalate. One actor believes it is delivering a limited warning or a controlled signal of deterrence. The opposing side, however, interprets that same action as a strategic escalation or preparation for a broader offensive. From that point, responses begin to intensify in sequence. Each move is framed as defensive, yet each is perceived as offensive by the other. Over time, this cycle compresses diplomatic space and accelerates the pace of escalation far beyond initial expectations. It is precisely because of this dynamic that international mediators are expected to become increasingly active. Multiple governments are likely attempting, even now, to establish or reinforce communication channels designed to reduce misinterpretations and stabilize the situation. These efforts often remain invisible to the public, but they can play a decisive role in preventing escalation from becoming irreversible. Whether these diplomatic efforts succeed may ultimately depend on decisions taken within a very narrow and critical window in the coming days. For now, military readiness levels across the region are expected to remain elevated. Air defense systems are likely to stay on alert, intelligence monitoring will intensify, and regional forces may continue adjusting positions in response to perceived threats. At the same time, world leaders are closely assessing whether the situation is stabilizing or transitioning into a more dangerous and unpredictable phase. What is becoming increasingly clear tonight is that the Middle East once again finds itself at a sensitive strategic crossroads. The developments unfolding now may influence regional security calculations for years to come. They could shape military doctrine, alter alliance structures, redefine diplomatic strategies, and even impact global energy markets and economic planning far beyond the region itself. Perhaps more importantly, this moment may test whether the international system still possesses the capacity to contain high-level geopolitical crises before they expand beyond control. For now, uncertainty remains the dominant condition. Many critical questions remain unresolved. Will diplomacy gain enough momentum to de-escalate tensions? Will military responses remain limited and proportional? Will regional actors stay contained? Or could the situation widen in unexpected ways? The world continues to watch closely, not only because of what has already occurred, but because of what may still unfold. As tensions persist, one fact becomes increasingly evident. The decisions made in the coming hours and days could carry consequences extending far beyond the immediate parties involved, shaping the broader trajectory of regional stability, international diplomacy, and global security architecture. Yet behind official statements, press briefings, and carefully constructed political messaging, another layer of activity may already be underway. While public attention remains focused on visible developments such as missile interceptions, emergency alerts, and political declarations, many analysts believe that the most consequential dynamics are taking place through discrete diplomatic channels operating quietly across multiple capitals. In moments of severe geopolitical tension, governments rarely rely solely on public communication. Official statements are often shaped for domestic audiences, strategic signaling, and deterrence messaging rather than direct negotiation. Beneath this public layer, however, more nuanced and sensitive conversations often occur between diplomats, intelligence officials, and regional intermediaries. This pattern is particularly evident in crises involving deeply entrenched adversaries such as Iran, Israel, and the United States. Publicly, leaders may project firmness, resolve, and deterrence. Privately, however, there is often a parallel recognition of the risks associated with uncontrolled escalation. This dual-track communication, firm rhetoric in public, cautious dialogue in private, has been a recurring feature of major international crises throughout modern history. Back-channel diplomacy, in particular, becomes especially significant in such moments. Unlike formal negotiations, these channels allow governments to exchange messages without public scrutiny or immediate political consequences. They create space for clarification of intent, exploration of limited compromises, and testing of de-escalation frameworks without appearing politically vulnerable. According to multiple geopolitical analysts, one of the primary goals of such quiet engagement is not necessarily to resolve underlying political disputes, but to establish crisis management mechanisms capable of preventing miscalculation. In high-tension environments, misunderstanding itself can become the primary driver of escalation. A military movement misread as preparation for attack, a defensive deployment interpreted as offensive escalation, or a symbolic strike perceived as the opening phase of a broader campaign. Each of these scenarios can rapidly amplify tensions beyond intended limits. This is why indirect communication channels often become more valuable during crisis periods than during stable diplomatic conditions. In many cases, intelligence agencies play a central role in facilitating this communication. Unlike traditional diplomacy, intelligence channels allow for faster, more discreet exchanges that carry a degree of plausible deniability. Through these mechanisms, messages can be transmitted between states regarding intent, limits, warnings, or reassurance without triggering immediate public or political pressure. At the core of these interactions is a shared recognition of ambiguity. Military actions are rarely self-explanatory. Analysts may observe troop movements, air defense activation, or missile launches, but the strategic intent behind those actions is often far more difficult to interpret. Are they retaliatory, symbolic, defensive, or preparatory? In the absence of clear communication, such ambiguity becomes inherently dangerous. For this reason, governments often attempt to define unofficial boundaries during crises. These informal understandings may include private signals about which actions could trigger significant escalation and which might be absorbed without broader retaliation. While such arrangements are rarely acknowledged publicly, they can play a crucial role in stabilizing volatile situations. However, public rhetoric itself can sometimes complicate these efforts. Once strong statements are made publicly, they create political expectations that can limit future flexibility. Leaders may become constrained by their own messaging as domestic audiences, political opponents, and military institutions interpret official statements as commitments rather than positioning. This creates a paradox in crisis management. The more forceful the public rhetoric becomes, the more important private communication may be in preserving flexibility. As a result, governments often maintain firm public positions while simultaneously authorizing quiet diplomatic engagement behind the scenes. The United States, in particular, occupies a complex position in the current environment. It remains committed to regional allies while also seeking to prevent broader escalation. This requires balancing deterrence, alliance obligations, and crisis containment simultaneously. As a result, American officials are likely engaging through multiple channels: direct coordination with allies, indirect communication via regional intermediaries, and potentially intelligence-linked messaging systems. At the same time, global powers beyond the region are closely monitoring developments, aware that escalation could have far-reaching consequences. A broader regional conflict could disrupt energy markets, shipping routes, global inflation trends, and financial stability, amplifying uncertainty in an already fragile international system. This global dimension helps explain why diplomatic activity may be intensifying, even if it remains largely invisible to the public. The most urgent objective in such moments is often not agreement, but containment, preventing the situation from crossing thresholds that would make it significantly harder to manage. Another important feature of crisis diplomacy is strategic ambiguity. Governments sometimes deliberately avoid full transparency in order to preserve flexibility. By keeping certain communications or intentions undisclosed, they reduce pressure to respond immediately and maintain space for negotiation. In many cases, the absence of visible diplomacy does not indicate inactivity, but rather a deliberate effort to operate without escalating public expectations. This is why experienced observers often note that the quietest phases of a crisis can be the most significant. While public attention focuses on visible military developments, the most decisive actions frequently occur through private conversations that never reach the headlines. A discreet warning, a private reassurance, or an informal understanding between intermediaries can significantly influence the trajectory of events. At the same time, the risk of unintended escalation remains high. Not all crises expand because of deliberate decisions. Many evolve due to timing, misinterpretation, or rapid sequences of events that outpace diplomatic response. Missile systems operate in minutes. Air defense decisions are made in seconds. And political leadership often reacts under intense domestic and strategic pressure. In such conditions, even small misunderstandings can carry disproportionate consequences. This is why back-channel communication often focuses on reassurance rather than resolution. The immediate goal is not necessarily to solve broader political disagreements, but to clarify intent, reduce uncertainty, and prevent actions from being misinterpreted as preparation for wider conflict. Still, the effectiveness of these efforts depends heavily on trust, or at least predictability. In a fragmented international environment marked by competing narratives and declining mutual confidence, ensuring that private assurances are believed and respected becomes increasingly difficult. Despite these challenges, history suggests that even deeply adversarial relationships often attempt to avoid full-scale war once the risks of escalation become clearly visible. This does not eliminate the possibility of continued conflict, nor does it guarantee stabilization. But it does indicate that behind public confrontation, parallel efforts are often underway to manage and contain the crisis. In the coming days, analysts will be watching closely for subtle indicators that diplomatic engagement is influencing behavior. These may include shifts in public language, carefully calibrated military responses, unexpected diplomatic movements, or signs of restraint in areas where escalation had been anticipated. However, caution remains essential. Even active diplomacy cannot fully eliminate risk. Local commanders may act independently, political pressure may harden positions, and unforeseen incidents may rapidly change the strategic landscape. For this reason, many governments are likely pursuing a dual-track approach, preparing for escalation while simultaneously pursuing de-escalation. This duality defines the current moment. Military readiness increases alongside diplomatic engagement. Public warnings continue even as private communication expands. Strategic signaling intensifies while crisis management efforts proceed quietly in parallel. Ultimately, what the public sees may represent only a fraction of a much larger and more complex geopolitical process unfolding simultaneously across diplomatic networks, intelligence channels, military institutions, and regional power structures. And perhaps the most important question is not whether back-channel diplomacy exists, it almost certainly does, but whether it is strong, credible, and coordinated enough to prevent the situation from crossing into a phase where control becomes significantly more difficult to regain. For now, much of the answer remains hidden. In crises like this, visibility is not the same as reality. Often the most important conversations are the ones that never appear in public view, yet quietly determine the direction of events that shape regional and global stability.